A dog brings a dying kitten to the vet. But what the vet finds out next makes him break down in tears. At first, it looks like a tragic mistake, a hunting dog delivering his prey. But one look into the dog's eyes changes everything. The kitten wasn't attacked, it was poisoned. And this dog didn't harm it, he saved it. As the vet fights to keep the kitten alive, a dark pattern begins to emerge. Why has this dog risked everything to bring in the broken? And what secret is he hiding about the man who claims to own him? When the truth comes out, it won't just change one life. It could bring an entire town to its knees. What is this dog trying to tell the world? And why is someone desperate to silence him? You being here is a reminder. The quiet acts of love and kindness still matter. If you hold space for compassion, you're already part of this community. The autumn wind whistled through the empty parking lot of Winston Veterinary Clinic as Dr. Jackson Winston sorted through another stack of unpaid bills. The red final notice stamps seemed to mock him from every envelope. He rubbed his tired eyes, glancing at the framed photo of his late wife Sarah on his desk. Her bright smile, frozen in time before the cancer took her, made his heart ache. "Just one more month," he whispered to her picture. "Maybe things will turn around by then." The rural Montana practice that had once been bustling with patients now sat quiet most days. Many of his longtime clients had switched to the new corporate veterinary chain that opened in the next town over. Their glossy advertising and payment plans were hard to compete with when you were drowning in debt. Jackson looked at his watch. 8:30 in the evening. Time to close up. He started his nightly routine, checking on the two overnight patients, a cat recovering from surgery and an elderly dog with pneumonia. Both were stable, thankfully. Small victories. As he walked through the darkened waiting room toward the front door, a sharp scratching sound made him freeze. Something was outside. Living in Montana meant the occasional bear or mountain lion wandering too close to town. Jackson reached for the baseball bat he kept behind the reception desk, just in case. The scratching came again, more insistent this time, followed by a low whine. That didn't sound like a wild animal. Jackson flicked on the exterior lights and peered through the glass door. A massive German shepherd stood there, its amber eyes reflecting the sudden brightness. The dog's muscular frame spoke of power, but it was his bearing that caught Jackson's attention. There was something almost military about his posture. Despite his impressive size, the shepherd wasn't threatening. Instead, he looked urgent. That's when Jackson noticed what the dog was carrying. Held ever so gently between powerful jaws was a tiny kitten, its gray fur matted and still. The shepherd whined again, pawing at the door. "Well, this is different," Jackson muttered, setting aside the bat. Every instinct told him this wasn't a predator with prey. The dog's body language was all wrong for that. He opened the door cautiously. The German shepherd didn't charge in, but waited for permission, his eyes never leaving Jackson's face. Up close, Jackson could see the scars beneath the dog's fur, old wounds that had healed long ago. "Okay, big guy. Come on in," Jackson said softly. The shepherd padded inside with deliberate care, still cradling the kitten. Jackson led them to an exam room, flipping on lights as he went. The dog followed without hesitation, clearly familiar with veterinary clinics. When Jackson patted the exam table, the shepherd gently deposited the kitten on its surface and stepped back, watching intently. "Let's see what we've got here." Jackson examined the tiny patient. The kitten couldn't have been more than 6 weeks old. It was severely dehydrated and hypothermic, but he found a faint heartbeat. "Still hanging in there, little one." The German shepherd sat at attention, tracking Jackson's every move as he worked to stabilize the kitten. There was something remarkable about the dog's focused concern. Jackson had treated working dogs before, police canines, search and rescue teams, and this shepherd had that same trained intelligence in his eyes. "You've had some training, haven't you?" Jackson murmured as he inserted an IV line into the kitten. The shepherd's ears perked up at his voice. "And those are combat scars, if I've ever seen them." "Military working dog?" The mention of military made the shepherd's tail thump once against the floor. Jackson's throat tightened as he thought of his brother-in-law, Mark, who had served as a K-9 handler in Afghanistan. Both Mark and his dog had been killed in action 3 years ago. As Jackson worked to warm the kitten with heated blankets and fluids, he kept talking to the shepherd. "You need a name, friend. Can't keep calling you big guy." He noticed a patch of lighter fur on the dog's chest that vaguely resembled a hammer. "How about Thor? You're certainly built like a Norse god." The shepherd's tail wagged, and Jackson managed a small smile, his first genuine one in weeks. There was something both comforting and mysterious about this powerful animal who had appeared out of nowhere to save a kitten. The next hour passed in focused work as Jackson treated the kitten. Thor remained a steady presence, moving only to make space when Jackson needed to reach something, but always keeping both human and kitten in his sight. His behavior was far too purposeful to be coincidence. Finally, the kitten's condition stabilized. Its tiny body temperature had returned to normal, and it had begun to show signs of consciousness, letting out a weak mew. "Well, Thor, looks like your rescue mission was a success," Jackson said, scratching behind the shepherd's ears. "This little one's going to make it, thanks to you." Thor leaned into the touch briefly before returning to his alert posture. Looking at him, Jackson felt an odd sense of purpose stirring, something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. This wasn't just a random encounter. Something told him Thor had chosen this clinic, chosen him for a reason. Jackson checked his watch again, nearly 10 o'clock now. The kitten would need monitoring overnight, and he had no idea what to do with his unusual canine visitor. Thor solved that dilemma by lying down next to the exam table, clearly settling in for the night. "Planning to stick around, are you?" Jackson asked. Thor's steady gaze was answer enough. "All right, then. Let me get you some water and food. Something tells me we both could use the company." As Jackson went to fetch supplies, he glanced at the stack of bills still waiting on his desk. The weight of his financial troubles hadn't magically disappeared, but somehow it felt more manageable. Sometimes hope arrived in unexpected packages, like a battle-scarred shepherd with a heart big enough to rescue a kitten. He returned to find Thor still guarding his tiny charge, and for the first time in months Jackson felt truly needed again. Whatever tomorrow might bring, tonight he had a purpose. Tonight he had helped save a life. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep going. As Jackson worked to stabilize the tiny kitten, something nagged at his veterinary instincts. The symptoms didn't quite match what he'd expect from exposure or natural causes. The kitten's breath carried a sweet chemical smell that made his stomach clench with recognition. "Let me run a quick test," he murmured to Thor, who hadn't moved from his vigilant position. Jackson drew a small blood sample from the kitten, his movements gentle but urgent. Years of experience had taught him to trust his gut when something felt wrong. The test results confirmed his worst fears. "Ethylene glycol," he said grimly. "Antifreeze poisoning." Thor's ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Jackson immediately began the specific treatment protocol for antifreeze poisoning, administering ethanol to counter the toxic effects. The precision of the dosage in the kitten's system troubled him deeply. Having treated accidental antifreeze poisoning before, he knew this was different. The levels were too exact, too calculated. "This wasn't an accident," he told Thor, who watched him with knowing eyes. "Someone did this deliberately." The thought made him sick. Who would intentionally poison a helpless kitten? And how had Thor known to bring it here? The German shepherd's behavior was too purposeful, too focused to be random. Jackson glanced at the clock. 11:15 at night. The kitten was stable for now, receiving treatment through the IV. He had time to investigate. "Stay with our patient," he told Thor. The shepherd settled more firmly into his guard position as Jackson walked to his office. The security system he'd installed after a break-in last year wasn't fancy, but it covered the parking lot and the area around the clinic. Jackson pulled up the footage from earlier that evening, rewinding to before Thor's arrival. What he saw made his blood run cold. The cameras showed Thor moving with military precision through the shadows behind the clinic. But he wasn't hunting, he was searching. The shepherd paused at the edge of the frame, looking toward a house barely visible in the background. Even in the grainy footage, Jackson could see the dog's alert posture change to one of focused determination. Thor disappeared from view for several minutes. When he reappeared, he was carrying the kitten with incredible gentleness. The footage showed him making a direct line to the clinic's front door, his path deliberate and purposeful. "You knew exactly where you were going," Jackson said softly. Thor, who had padded silently into the office behind him, whined in response. Jackson switched to a different camera angle, one that partially showed the yard Thor had visited. His breath caught in his throat. In the dim light, he could make out several small still forms scattered near some bushes. Other cats already dead. "Someone systematically killing strays," he whispered. The realization hit him hard. This wasn't a single act of cruelty. It was an organized effort to eliminate unwanted animals in the most brutal way possible. Thor's presence suddenly made perfect sense. The German shepherd hadn't attacked the kitten, he'd rescued it. Somehow, this highly trained military dog had discovered what was happening and taken action. Jackson rewound the footage further, watching hours compress into minutes. The pattern became clear. Someone had been leaving out small dishes in their backyard, dishes that likely contained antifreeze, whose sweet taste would attract curious animals. The timestamp showed this had been going on for at least several days. "That's why you brought the kitten here," Jackson said, turning to Thor. "You knew it needed medical help." The shepherd's intelligent eyes met his, and Jackson was struck again by the dog's extraordinary awareness. He checked the kitten's vital signs again. The early treatment was working. Its breathing had steadied, and its heart rate was stronger. If Thor hadn't intervened when he did, the kitten would certainly have died like the others. Jackson sat heavily in his office chair, running a hand through his graying hair. The weight of this discovery pressed down on him. As a veterinarian, he was legally obligated to report animal cruelty. But he was also struggling to keep his clinic afloat. Getting involved in a criminal investigation could drive away what few clients he had left. Thor placed his head on Jackson's knee, looking up at him with those knowing amber eyes. The scars visible in the dog's fur reminded Jackson of a sacrifice and duty, of his brother-in-law Mark, who had given his life serving with his canine partner. "What would you do, Mark?" he whispered to the empty office. The answer came immediately, clear as day. Mark had always said that doing the right thing wasn't about counting the cost. It was about being able to live with yourself afterward. Jackson reached for his phone to call the police, but paused when he noticed Thor's sudden alertness. The shepherd's ears were forward, his posture tense. Something outside had caught his attention. Moving to the window, Jackson peered out into the darkness. A figure was moving in the shadows near the house where the poisonings had occurred. Even as he watched, the person bent down, replacing what looked like small dishes along the property line. Jackson's hand tightened on his phone. The evidence was right there, happening in real time. Thor stood beside him, a low growl building in his chest. "Easy, boy," Jackson soothed, though his own heart was racing. "We'll stop this. I promise." He began recording with his phone, documenting the scene before calling the authorities. The image quality wasn't great in the darkness, but combined with the security footage and the poisoned kitten's blood work, it would be enough to prove intentional animal cruelty. Thor's presence beside him felt like an anchor, grounding him in the certainty that he was doing the right thing. This powerful, intelligent animal had trusted him enough to bring him evidence of a terrible crime. Now it was his turn to honor that trust. As Jackson dialed 911, he realized that for the first time since Sarah's death, he felt truly alive. His financial troubles hadn't vanished, but they seemed less important in the face of this clear moral choice. Sometimes purpose came disguised as a crisis, and hope arrived wearing battle scars and fur. The kitten mewed weakly from the other room, reminding them both of the immediate stakes. Thor turned his head at the sound, then looked back at Jackson with an expression that seemed to say, "What are we waiting for?" "Yes," Jackson said into the phone when the operator answered. "I need to report an ongoing case of animal cruelty. I have evidence of deliberate poisoning." His voice was steady as he explained the situation. Thor's solid presence beside him a reminder that he wasn't facing this alone. The police had just left after taking Jackson's statement when the clinic's front door burst open. A tall man in expensive ranching clothes stormed in, his heavy boots echoing against the linoleum floor. His cold gray eyes swept the waiting room before landing on Thor, who had immediately positioned himself between Jackson and the newcomer. "There's my hunting dog," the man announced, his voice carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed. "I'm Wade Garrison, and that's my $50,000 German Shepherd you've got there." Jackson noticed how Thor's posture changed. The shepherd's ears flattened, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. It wasn't the reaction of a dog seeing its owner. "I'm Dr. Winston," Jackson said calmly, though his heart was racing. "Your dog brought us a poisoned kitten earlier tonight." Garrison waved his hand dismissively. "Probably some worthless stray. The dog's been acting up lately, getting into things he shouldn't. Now, if you'll just hand over my property, we'll be on our way." Jackson moved closer to Thor, noticing how the dog pressed against his leg. "The kitten wasn't just getting into things," he said. "It was deliberately poisoned with antifreeze. I have security footage showing—" "Security footage?" Garrison cut him off, his face darkening. "Of what, exactly?" "Of Thor rescuing the kitten from a yard where someone's been systematically poisoning strays." Jackson watched Garrison's reaction carefully. "The police have been notified." The change in Garrison's demeanor was immediate and frightening. The casual arrogance vanished, replaced by something harder and colder. "The police," he said flatly. "Over a few dead cats? Doctor, surely you have more pressing matters to attend to. I know this clinic isn't exactly thriving." The threat in those words was clear. Jackson felt a chill run down his spine, but he stood his ground. "I can't release Thor to you right now." "Can't?" Garrison's voice dropped dangerously. "That's my dog, and I have the papers to prove it. As a veterinarian, I have both the right and obligation to temporarily hold an animal if I suspect abuse or illegal activity," Jackson said, grateful his voice remained steady. "Thor shows signs of recent trauma and behavioral modification that concern me. Until I can verify his condition and ownership, he stays here." Garrison took a step forward, his hands clenching into fists. Thor's growl grew louder, and the man stopped short. "You have no idea what you're getting involved in, Dr. Winston. I own half this county. One phone call from me, and what's left of your practice will disappear overnight." Jackson thought of the kitten fighting for its life in the treatment room, of the dead animals in the security footage. He thought of his brother-in-law, Mark, who had given his life serving alongside his military K-9 partner. The weight of his wedding ring reminded him of Sarah. who had always told him that integrity mattered more than money. "Mr. Garrison," he said quietly, "if you are Thor's legal owner, you can return during business hours with the proper documentation. Until then, he remains in protective custody." Garrison's face turned an alarming shade of red. "You sanctimonious fool," he spat. "You think you can play hero with my property? I'll have this place shut down by morning. You'll never work as a vet again in Montana." "That's your choice," Jackson replied, standing straighter. "But Thor stays here tonight." For a moment, Garrison looked like he might actually throw a punch. But Thor's continued growling and alert stance made him think better of it. He jabbed a finger at Jackson instead. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Not by a long shot. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life, Doctor." He spun on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Jackson's legs felt weak, and he sank into a nearby chair. Thor immediately came to him, resting his head on Jackson's knee. The shepherd's amber eyes looked up at him with what seemed like gratitude. "What happened to you, boy?" Jackson murmured, gently examining the scars he could see through Thor's fur. "And how did you end up with someone like that?" Thor's only response was to press closer, offering silent support. Jackson ran his fingers through the dog's thick fur, noticing how the shepherd's muscles remained tense, as if still on guard. The kitten's weak meow from the treatment room reminded Jackson of his immediate responsibilities. He stood up, his determination returning. Garrison's threats were frightening, but he couldn't back down now. Too many lives, both animal and human, had been lost to people who chose profit over compassion. "Come on," he told Thor. "Let's check on our patient. Whatever Garrison has planned, we'll face it together." As they walked to the treatment room, Jackson tried not to think about the bills piling up on his desk or how few clients he had left. He'd made his choice. Now he had to live with the consequences, whatever they might be. Thor padded silently beside him, a solid presence that somehow made the burden feel lighter. The German shepherd's unwavering loyalty to what was right, despite whatever trauma he'd endured, gave Jackson strength. Sometimes courage meant standing your ground, even when you stood alone. Except he wasn't alone, Jackson realized. He had an extraordinary dog at his side, one who had already proven his own moral courage. Together, they would uncover whatever dark secret Wade Garrison was trying to hide, no matter the cost. The morning sun cast long shadows through the clinic's windows as Jackson reviewed Thor's medical charts. The German shepherd hadn't left his side all night, keeping watch while Jackson tended to the recovering kitten. The sound of tires on gravel made them both look up. Through the window, Jackson saw 3 expensive vehicles pull into the parking lot. Wade Garrison stepped out of a black SUV, followed by 2 men in business suits carrying briefcases. Thor's low growl echoed Jackson's own unease. "It's okay, boy," Jackson murmured, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to reassure. The bell above the door chimed as Garrison entered, his presence filling the small waiting room. This time, his anger had been replaced by something worse: confidence. "Dr. Winston," Garrison said smoothly, "I believe we got off on the wrong foot last night. These gentlemen are my attorneys. Perhaps we could speak in your office." Jackson nodded slowly, gesturing toward the back. "This way." He noticed how Thor positioned himself between them again, staying close to Jackson's leg. Inside his cramped office, the mounting bills seemed to mock him from their scattered positions across his desk. Garrison's lawyers remained standing while their client settled into the visitor's chair like he owned it. In a way, Jackson realized with growing dread, maybe he did. "I'll be direct," Garrison said, pulling a thick folder from one of his lawyers. "I've been acquiring properties throughout the county, struggling businesses, foreclosed homes, abandoned lots, including, as of this morning, the mortgage on this building." Jackson's stomach dropped. He'd been behind on payments since Sarah's medical bills had drained their savings, but he hadn't realized the bank would sell his mortgage. "You're 3 months behind," Garrison continued, his gray eyes cold. "Under the terms of the loan, I could start foreclosure proceedings immediately, but I'm willing to be reasonable." "Reasonable?" Jackson's voice was hoarse. "Give me my dog back. Sign a non-disclosure agreement about last night's incident, and we'll refinance your loan. Lower interest rate, manageable payments." Garrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You can keep your clinic open, continue serving the community. Everyone wins." Jackson looked down at Thor, who stared back with those intelligent amber eyes. The dog's military bearing reminded him so much of Mark, his brother-in-law, who had given his life serving alongside his K-9 partner in Afghanistan. The thought of handing this brave animal over to someone capable of systematic animal cruelty made his chest tight. "And if I refuse?" Garrison's smile vanished. "Then I'll foreclose on your clinic, sue you for theft of my property, and make sure no bank in Montana will touch you with a 10-foot pole. You'll lose everything. What's left of it, anyway?" The threat hung in the air like smoke. Jackson's eyes drifted to the photo on his desk. Sarah smiling at their wedding before the cancer took her. She had always said that integrity was worth more than money. "The security footage," Jackson said quietly, "shows systematic poisoning of animals on your property. As a licensed veterinarian, I have a legal and ethical obligation to report animal cruelty." "Footage can be corrupted," one of the lawyers spoke up. "The equipment malfunctions, records get lost." "And vets who can't pay their bills," Garrison added, "lose their practices. Simple as that." Jackson stood up slowly, his decision crystallizing. "Mr. Garrison, I've already lost my wife. I've lost my savings. I've nearly lost my practice. But I haven't lost my conscience." "Don't be a fool," Garrison snapped. "You think anyone cares about a few strays? This is bigger than you understand. That dog is mine, and you're nothing but a failing vet in a dying town." "Thor stays here," Jackson said firmly, "and the police already have copies of the footage." Garrison's face darkened as he rose from his chair. "You're making a serious mistake, Doctor. I've broken better men than you. By this time next week, you'll be out of business and out of options." "Maybe," Jackson acknowledged, "but I'll still be able to look myself in the mirror." "Integrity doesn't pay bills," Garrison snarled. "You have 24 hours to reconsider. After that, I'll bury you in so much legal paperwork, you'll never practice veterinary medicine again." The three men stormed out, leaving Jackson alone with Thor. The German shepherd pressed against his leg, offering silent support as Jackson sank back into his chair. Through the window, he watched Garrison's convoy pull away in a cloud of dust. His hands were shaking as he picked up Sarah's photo, tracing her smile through the glass. "What do you think, honey?" he whispered. "Did I just throw away everything we built?" Thor whined softly, resting his head on Jackson's knee. Despite the scars visible through his fur, the shepherd's eyes held unwavering loyalty and courage. Whatever Garrison had done to him hadn't broken his spirit or his moral compass. Jackson scratched behind Thor's ears, feeling the weight of his decision settle onto his shoulders. He'd chosen principle over survival, knowing it might cost him everything he had left. But looking at Thor, a dog who had risked everything to save a helpless kitten, Jackson knew he couldn't have chosen differently. The pile of bills on his desk seemed to grow taller, and the future looked more uncertain than ever. But as Thor's warm presence steadied him, Jackson felt a strange peace settle over him. Some things were worth more than money or security. His wife had taught him that, and he wouldn't dishonor her memory by compromising now. A weak meow from the treatment room reminded him that he still had patients who needed him. Whatever Garrison had planned, Jackson would face it, knowing he'd stayed true to his principles. Sometimes that had to be enough. Jackson worked through the night, monitoring the poisoned kitten's vital signs while Thor watched intently from the corner of the treatment room. Something about the German Shepherd's behavior seemed oddly methodical. The way he tracked every movement, studied each medical instrument, and responded to the kitten's condition with almost human-like concern. Around 3 a.m, while checking the kitten's temperature, Jackson noticed Thor pacing anxiously by the door. The dog would look at him, then the door, then back again, with clear intent. "What is it, boy?" Jackson asked, recognizing the intelligence in those amber eyes. Thor barked once softly and moved to the door. When Jackson didn't immediately follow, the shepherd grabbed his lab coat sleeve gently between his teeth and tugged. "You want me to follow you?" Another soft bark. Jackson glanced at the kitten, now stable on IV fluids. "Let me get my medical bag, just in case." The moment he grabbed his bag, Thor led him outside into the cool Montana night. The shepherd moved with purpose, leading Jackson to the outskirts of town, where an old Thompson barn stood abandoned. The structure had been empty for years, ever since the family moved away during the last economic downturn. What Jackson discovered inside left him speechless. In one corner, carefully arranged on old horse blankets, were 3 cats and a young raccoon, all showing signs of similar poisoning to his current patient. More surprisingly, he found a makeshift first aid station, stolen gauze, bandages, and even some basic medical supplies that he recognized from Garrison's ranch inventory. "You've been doing this for a while, haven't you?" Jackson whispered, watching Thor check on each animal with gentle attention. He pulled out his phone and began reviewing security footage from neighboring properties, looking for patterns. The evidence was astonishing. Over the past 3 months, Thor had been systematically rescuing poisoned animals from Garrison's property. The footage showed the shepherd carrying injured creatures to safety, stealing medical supplies, and even attempting basic first aid techniques he must have learned from observing the ranch's veterinary staff. One clip showed Thor carefully cleaning a cat's wound with stolen gauze, mimicking the exact motions Jackson himself used in treatment. Another showed the shepherd creating a crude splint for an injured rabbit's leg using twigs and bandages. "This is extraordinary," Jackson murmured, watching Thor demonstrate his nurturing routine with the other animals. The dog's movements were precise and practiced, showing an understanding of care that went far beyond basic animal instinct. The truth hit Jackson like a thunderbolt. Thor wasn't just a clever dog. He was something far more remarkable, a highly trained military canine who had chosen to use his intelligence and training to save lives, rather than take them. In that moment, Jackson understood that his decision to protect Thor wasn't just about one dog. It was about preserving something truly extraordinary. Jackson spent the next morning making calls and digging through records while Thor kept watch over the recovering animals. Each new piece of information painted a darker picture of Wade Garrison's true intentions for the community. "Another one?" Jackson muttered, adding a red pin to the map he'd spread across his desk. He'd marked every reported case of animal poisoning over the past 6 months. The pattern was unmistakable. A steadily expanding circle centered on Garrison's ranch. His old friend Sarah Miller from the town clerk's office had sent over some troubling documents. Property records showed Garrison systematically buying up foreclosed lands and struggling family farms, particularly those affected by mysterious pet deaths. The prices were well below market value, with desperate sellers just wanting to leave the area that had brought them so much heartbreak. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Betty Thompson, a local elementary school teacher. "Dr. Winston, I'm so glad I reached you," her voice trembled. "We lost another classroom pet this weekend. Little Sunshine, our guinea pig. The children are devastated. That's the 3rd one this year." Jackson's hand tightened around the receiver. "I'm so sorry, Betty. Was there any sign of what happened?" Same as the others. She just got sick suddenly. Started acting strange then. Betty's voice cracked. Tommy Martinez found her when he came to feed her Monday morning. He's only 8 years old, Jackson. He hasn't stopped crying. Jackson added another pin to his map, right in the heart of what he now recognized as Garrison's expansion zone. The school sat on prime real estate, perfect for the development project he'd uncovered in the county planning documents. Thor padded over and rested his head on Jackson's knee, those intelligent eyes watching as Jackson connected more dots. The German shepherd had somehow understood what was happening long before any human had caught on. "You've been trying to tell us all along, haven't you, boy?" Jackson scratched behind Thor's ears. "You knew this wasn't random." He turned back to his computer, scrolling through the development plans he'd discovered. Garrison's proposed Mountain Vista Resort would transform 5,000 acres of rural Montana into a luxury playground for the wealthy. The detailed rendering showed golf courses, ski lodges, and high-end shopping centers where family farms now stood. The entire character of their small town would be erased. A knock at the door startled him. It was Mike Chen, whose family ran the local hardware store. "Doc, got a minute?" Mike's eyes were red-rimmed. "It's about Pepper." Jackson's heart sank. Pepper was the Chen family's 12-year-old border collie, beloved by all the neighborhood kids. "We found her this morning," Mike continued, voice rough. "My daughter Lisa. She's not handling it well. Pepper was fine yesterday, then suddenly—" He shook his head. "The weird thing is, she never left our yard. But Garrison's people were surveying the property line yesterday." Jackson added another pin to his map. The Chen store sat at a crucial intersection in the development plans. Throughout the day, more stories emerged. Jackson spoke with 15 different families, each sharing similar accounts of mysterious pet deaths. The timeline aligned perfectly with Garrison's land acquisitions and survey work. By evening, Jackson had compiled a devastating picture of systematic destruction. Garrison wasn't just poisoning strays. He was strategically eliminating beloved pets to drive families away from properties he wanted to acquire. The antifreeze poisonings were calculated, leaving no evidence that could be traced back to him. Thor had been working against this plan for months, saving whatever animals he could find. But for everyone the shepherd rescued, many more had been lost. The toll on the community was heartbreaking. Jackson found himself looking at photos of grieving children in the local paper. Tommy Martinez hugging his mother at the school, Lisa Chen holding Pepper's empty collar, the Williams twins standing beside their empty horse paddock after their pony's mysterious death. These weren't just animal casualties. These were deliberate attacks on the community's heart. The evidence was clear, but proving it would be nearly impossible. Garrison had been careful to maintain plausible deniability, using untraceable methods and taking advantage of the fact that antifreeze poisoning could appear accidental. Jackson sat back in his chair, the weight of knowledge heavy on his shoulders. Thor came to sit beside him, as if sensing his internal struggle. The shepherd's presence reminded him of everything at stake, not just his clinic or his livelihood, but the soul of their community. "What do you think, boy?" Jackson asked quietly. "Do we fight this?" Thor's steady gaze held no doubt. The dog had already made his choice months ago, choosing to risk everything to save innocent lives. Now Jackson had to make the same choice. He looked at the wall of his clinic, where a photo of his late wife hung beside his veterinary oath. She had always told him that doing the right thing wasn't about calculating the cost. It was about following your conscience, no matter the price. The stack of unpaid bills on his desk seemed to mock him. Garrison could destroy him financially with a single phone call. But as Jackson watched Thor check on the recovering kitten, he realized some things were worth more than financial security. He picked up his phone and dialed the number for the State Environmental Protection Office. Hello, this is Dr. Jackson Winston. I need to report evidence of systematic animal poisoning and environmental crimes in Pleasant Valley County. Thor's tail wagged once, approval clear in his intelligent eyes. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The morning sun cast long shadows across Jackson's clinic parking lot as Laura Hendricks pulled up in her weathered Jeep. Camera equipment rattled in the back as she parked, and Thor's ears perked up at the familiar sound. Jackson had called her after seeing her recent photos in the local paper documenting wildlife patterns in the area. Laura stepped out, her auburn hair catching the sunlight as she gathered her equipment. "Dr. Winston, I came as soon as I could. Your message about systematic animal poisoning matches patterns I've been tracking for months." Jackson led her inside, where Thor sat attentively by the rescued kitten's cage. "This is Thor, the one I mentioned. He's been bringing poisoned animals to the clinic." Laura's eyes widened as she set down her camera bag. "That's Garrison's dog." She pulled out her laptop and opened a folder of photographs. "I've been watching him for weeks, but I couldn't figure out what he was doing. Look at these." The images showed Thor moving through the wilderness with purpose, carrying injured rabbits, leading limping deer to water, even bringing medical supplies to wounded animals. Each photo was meticulously dated and tagged with GPS coordinates. "I thought I was documenting unusual animal behavior," Laura explained, scrolling through dozens of similar images. "But these aren't random acts. He's conducting organized rescue operations." Jackson leaned closer to the screen. "The level of intelligence he shows, it's like he's had professional training." "He has." Laura pulled up an old newspaper article. "I did some digging into local history. Look at this, from 15 years ago." The yellowed photograph showed a younger Wade Garrison standing beside his father, Richard Garrison. Between them stood a much younger Thor, wearing a search and rescue vest. Richard Garrison ran one of the most respected K-9 rescue training programs in Montana, Laura explained. Thor was one of his star pupils. But when Richard died 5 years ago, Wade took over. The rescue program disappeared practically overnight. Thor moved closer, his amber eyes fixed on the old photograph. Jackson noticed how the dog's posture changed. More alert, almost military in its precision. "Wade must have tried to reprogram him for hunting," Jackson said, watching Thor's reaction. "But instead of killing, Thor's still trying to rescue, fighting against whatever Wade tried to make him become." Laura nodded, pulling up more recent photos. "Look at his behavior patterns. He's using all his rescue training, but for a different purpose. The way he carries injured animals, the first aid techniques, even how he scouts for victims. It's all professional search and rescue methodology." They spent the next few hours piecing together Thor's story through Laura's photographs and local records. Richard Garrison had built his reputation on training dogs for mountain rescue, disaster response, and wildlife rehabilitation. Thor had been his personal project, a dog with exceptional intelligence and empathy. Laura said, "The old-timers at the coffee shop still talk about Richard," showing Jackson more articles. "He believed in using dogs to protect and preserve wildlife, not hunt it. Wade's development plans would have broken his heart." Jackson watched Thor checking on the kitten, noting the gentle precision in his movements. "He's not just acting on instinct. Every move is deliberate, trained. He's choosing to use his skills to save lives instead of take them." Laura's camera clicked softly as she documented Thor's interaction with the kitten. "It's more than that. Look at how he positions himself, always between the injured animal and the door. He's not just rescuing them, he's protecting them. That's core search and rescue behavior." They found more evidence of Thor's training in surprising places. The abandoned barn where he had been hiding rescued animals was organized like a triage center, with separate areas for different types of injuries. The medical supplies he'd stolen were arranged precisely how they would be in a rescue camp. Wade tried to corrupt everything his father built, Laura said, reviewing her notes. The land, the animals, even Thor's training. But he couldn't change Thor's fundamental nature. Jackson remembered Garrison's cold anger when he demanded Thor's return. He must know Thor's working against him. That's why he was so desperate to get him back. Thor's not just saving animals, Laura realized, looking at her map data points. He's documenting the pattern of poisonings. Every rescue, every cache of medical supplies, they all connect to Garrison's development plans. He's building a case against his own master. The German shepherd watched them intently as they worked, occasionally bringing them relevant items, old training toys from Richard's program, pieces of rescue equipment he'd salvaged. Each object helped fill in another piece of his story. "Your old handler taught you well," Jackson said softly to Thor. "You never forgot what you were really trained for." Laura captured a few final photographs of Thor with the recovering kitten. "We have enough evidence to show Thor's rescue training and his current activities, but proving Garrison's direct involvement in the poisonings will be harder." "Thor's been trying to show us for months," Jackson replied. "We just needed to understand what we were seeing." He turned to Laura, struck by the determination in her eyes. "Will you help me build this case?" "That's why I came to Montana in the first place," Laura said, her camera ready. "To document and protect wildlife. I never expected to find this level of organized destruction, or this kind of heroism fighting against it." Thor moved to stand between them, his bearing proud and alert, every inch the rescue dog he was trained to be. In his presence, Jackson felt the weight of Richard Garrison's legacy, not just of training dogs, but of using their remarkable abilities to protect and preserve life. Laura reached down to pat Thor's head. Wade may have tried to change him, but Thor never forgot his true purpose. Every rescue is an act of rebellion against what Wade wanted him to become. Jackson watched them together, feeling a surge of hope for the first time since discovering Garrison's schemes. With Laura's documentation skills and Thor's continued rescue work, they had a chance to expose the truth and stop the destruction of their community. Thor's tail wagged once, decisively, as if sealing their alliance. The old rescue dog had chosen his new partners in his mission to save lives and protect the innocent. Together, they would work to honor Richard Garrison's legacy and bring his son's cruel plans to light. Jackson sat at his desk, staring at the stack of files Laura had helped him obtain. The military records were marked with official seals and stamped classified in bold red letters. His hands trembled as he opened the first folder. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Laura asked gently, standing beside him. She had spent days working her connections as a journalist to access these documents. Thor lay at Jackson's feet, his amber eyes fixed on the papers as if he knew exactly what they contained. The German shepherd's posture had changed subtly since the files arrived, more alert, almost expectant. "I need to know the truth," Jackson replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He began reading, and with each page, his heart beat faster. The documents revealed a specialized military K-9 unit deployed in Afghanistan, trained for complex search and rescue operations in combat zones. Thor's official military designation and service record showed years of distinguished service. Photos showed him working alongside his handler in dusty mountain terrain, wearing tactical gear and moving with practiced precision. "Look at this," Laura said, pointing to a particular mission report. "Thor saved an entire squad by detecting an IED. He received a commendation for—" She stopped abruptly, noticing Jackson's face had gone pale. Jackson's fingers traced the name of Thor's handler in the report, Captain Michael Henderson. His brother-in-law's name jumped off the page like an electric shock. "Michael," Jackson whispered, his voice cracking. "This was Mike's dog." Thor whined softly and pressed his head against Jackson's leg. The connection that had been building between them suddenly made perfect sense. They were already family. Laura squeezed Jackson's shoulder as he struggled to process this revelation. "There's more," she said quietly, sliding another document forward. The report detailed Michael's final mission. Thor had been with him when their unit was ambushed. Despite severe injuries, Thor had stayed with Michael until the end, then led rescuers to his body. The dog had been decorated for his actions, but was traumatized by the loss. "I knew Mike died in Afghanistan," Jackson said, wiping his eyes. "Sarah, my wife, she was devastated. We never got all the details. And then, when she got sick..." His voice trailed off as another document caught his eye. It was a transfer order, dated 3 months after Michael's death. Thor was supposed to be retired with honors and placed with Michael's next of kin, the Winstons. But something had gone wrong. "Garrison," Laura said, her voice hard with anger. "Look at this falsified ownership claim. He used his connections to intercept Thor during transport. He literally stole a military hero." Jackson's grief transformed into rage as he read the forged documents. Garrison had used his money and influence to take Thor, erasing his military history and claiming him as a privately trained hunting dog. Thor stood up, his bearing now unmistakably military. He retrieved something from the corner, an old leather collar he'd kept hidden. Jackson examined it with trembling hands, finding Michael's service number stamped into the worn material. "You've been trying to tell me all along, haven't you?" Jackson said to Thor. "That's why you came to my clinic. You knew who I was." Laura's camera clicked softly as she documented this moment. "Thor's not just saving animals," she said. "He's honoring Michael's memory. Everything he's doing, the rescues, the evidence gathering, it's all an extension of his military training and his loyalty to your family." Jackson thought about all the times Thor had shown up with injured animals, how he'd organized his rescue operations with military precision. The dog hadn't just been fighting against Garrison's cruel intentions. He'd been carrying out his true mission, protecting the innocent, just as he had done with Michael. "Mike always said Thor was special," Jackson remembered, his voice thick with emotion. "He told us stories about Thor's intelligence, his courage. Sarah and I were supposed to take him in after..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Thor pressed against Jackson's side, offering comfort just as he must have done for Michael in their darkest moments. The bond between them wasn't just about saving animals or stopping Garrison. It was about family, loyalty, and keeping faith with those they'd lost. Laura gathered the documents carefully. "This changes everything," she said. "Garrison didn't just steal property. He stole a decorated military service animal. That's a federal offense." Jackson stood up, feeling stronger than he had in months. The weight of grief and financial pressure seemed lighter now, replaced by a sense of purpose. "Mike gave his life serving others," he said. "Thor's been carrying on that mission alone. But not anymore." He knelt beside Thor, looking into those intelligent eyes that had seen both battlefield horror and everyday cruelty. "I'm sorry it took me so long to find you," he said softly. "But I'm here now. We'll finish this together." Thor's posture straightened, and he gave a soft bark, an acknowledgement between soldiers. The military bearing that Jackson had noticed before now made perfect sense. Every rescue, every bit of evidence gathered against Garrison, had been Thor carrying out his duty with the discipline Michael had instilled in him. Garrison thought he could break Thor's training, turn him into a killer, Laura observed. But he didn't understand what he was dealing with. Military K-9s don't break faith with their handlers, not even after death. Jackson gathered the files, his determination hardening into resolve. The financial threats that had seemed so overwhelming now felt insignificant compared to the debt he owed his brother-in-law and this extraordinary dog who had never stopped serving. "Mike would be proud of you," Jackson told Thor. his voice steady despite his tears. "And Sarah would have loved knowing you were still out here, still protecting others." Thor's tail wagged once, decisively, and he moved to the clinic door. His posture said clearly that it was time to go back to work. There were still animals to save, evidence to gather, and a mission to complete. Jackson watched him, seeing now what he should have recognized from the start: the military bearing, the tactical precision, the unflagging sense of duty. Thor wasn't just a rescued dog or a trained companion. He was a soldier still honoring his fallen handler, and now he had found his way home to family. Jackson spread a worn topographical map across his clinic's examination table, while Laura arranged her photographs in chronological order. Thor sat alertly between them, his military bearing more pronounced now that they understood his background. "The barn is here," Jackson said, pointing to a spot 3 miles outside of town. "Thor's been using it as a kind of field hospital, the way he's organized it." He shook his head in amazement. "It's like a military triage center." Laura nodded, laying down a photo she'd taken of the barn's interior. "Look at how he's arranged the supplies, medical materials on one side, food and water on the other. He even created separate spaces for animals that need isolation." The photograph showed neat rows of stolen medical supplies and carefully arranged bedding. Thor had used his military training to create an organized rescue operation, methodically saving animals from Garrison's poisoning campaign. "We need to document everything," Laura said, checking her camera equipment. "The poison sites, the rescued animals, the medical evidence, and most importantly, the connection to Garrison's development plans." Jackson pulled out a thick folder of veterinary records. "I've compiled cases of suspicious animal deaths going back 6 months. The pattern is clear. They all cluster around properties Garrison wants to acquire." Thor walked to the window and growled softly. Jackson had learned to trust the dog's instincts, but when he looked outside, he saw only empty streets in the gathering dusk. "We should move quickly," Laura suggested, packing her camera gear. "If we can get comprehensive documentation tonight, I can have my editor review everything first thing tomorrow." What they didn't see was the black SUV parked 2 blocks away, where Wade Garrison sat watching the clinic through binoculars. His face was tight with barely controlled rage as he observed Jackson and Laura preparing for their investigation. "Follow them," he ordered the man beside him. "Once they're at the barn, call in the cleanup crew. Make it look like an accident." Back in the clinic, Jackson gathered his medical kit while Laura checked her flashlights. Thor paced between them, his behavior becoming increasingly agitated. "Something's wrong," Jackson said, watching the dog. "Thor's trying to tell us something." Laura finished loading her gear into her backpack. Could he sense someone watching us? His tactical training would make him sensitive to surveillance, Jackson agreed. But we can't wait. Those animals need documentation and proper medical care. They loaded their equipment into Laura's SUV, with Thor taking his usual position in the back. The dog's ears remained alert, head swiveling to track something only he could detect. As they drove toward the barn, Laura shared her publication strategy. "My editor has connections with state and federal investigators. Once we show them the evidence of military property theft, animal cruelty, and environmental violations, Garrison won't be able to buy his way out." "Assuming we can prove the connection," Jackson said. "Garrison's careful about keeping his hands clean." "That's why we need everything tonight," Laura replied. "The medical records, the poison samples, proof of Thor's military status, it all has to be documented properly." They didn't notice the dark vehicle following at a discreet distance, its headlights off despite the deepening darkness. Garrison's men maintained careful radio silence as they tracked their targets. The barn appeared ahead, a looming shadow against the twilight sky. Laura parked behind it, using the structure to shield their lights from the main road. Thor jumped out first, his posture tense and alert. "He's definitely sensing something," Jackson observed as they unloaded their gear. "I've never seen him this anxious." Inside the barn, the scope of Thor's rescue operation took Laura's breath away. Despite having photographed it before, the methodical organization still amazed her. Rescued animals rested in clean, separated areas. Medical supplies were arranged with military precision. Everything reflected Thor's training and intelligence. "Start with the medical evidence," Jackson suggested, pulling on latex gloves. "I'll document the injuries and treatment patterns while you photograph everything." Laura's camera clicked steadily as she captured the scene. "The way he's organized this, it's incredible. Look at how he separated the critical cases from those in recovery. That's straight from military field medicine protocols." They worked efficiently, driven by the urgency of their mission. Jackson collected samples and documented symptoms, while Laura photographed everything from multiple angles. Thor patrolled the perimeter, his agitation growing more pronounced. Neither of them heard the vehicles approaching until it was almost too late. Thor's warning bark cut through the quiet, just as headlights flooded the barn's interior. The sound of multiple engines surrounded them. "Get everything into your camera bag," Jackson ordered, quickly packing his medical samples. "We need to move, now." Laura secured her equipment with practiced speed. "There's a back exit behind the storage area. Thor showed it to me last time." They could hear car doors slamming, followed by the sound of multiple footsteps approaching the barn. Thor took up a defensive position between his people and the main entrance, his military training evident in every line of his body. Well, Garrison's voice carried through the darkness. "Looks like we caught ourselves some trespassers." Jackson felt his heart racing, but kept his voice steady. "It's not trespassing when we're gathering evidence of criminal activity." "Criminal activity?" Garrison's laugh held no humor. "The only criminals here are the ones stealing my property and interfering with legitimate business operations. Though I don't expect either of you to be around long enough to make those accusations in court." The sound of glass breaking came from multiple directions. Someone was throwing something into the barn. The sharp smell of gasoline filled the air. "Thor," Jackson whispered urgently, "get Laura out, now." The German shepherd understood immediately, pushing Laura toward the back exit while Jackson grabbed the most critical evidence. They could hear Garrison's men spreading out around the barn's perimeter. "Such a shame about the electrical fire," Garrison called out. "These old barns go up so quickly, sometimes with everything and everyone inside them." The first flames appeared near the front entrance, spreading with unnatural speed across the gasoline-soaked floor. Time had run out. Thor led them toward their only escape route, his military training transforming him from rescue dog to tactical escort. But as they reached the back of the barn, they realized Garrison's trap was more thorough than they'd anticipated. The flames spread rapidly across the gasoline-soaked hay, turning the barn into a blazing inferno. Jackson's heart pounded as he heard the terrified cries of animals coming from inside. Through the smoke, he could make out the shapes of cages and makeshift pens, where Thor had carefully arranged his rescued patients. "We can't let them die," Jackson said, pulling his shirt over his nose. The heat from the fire was already intense, making his eyes water. "There are dozens of animals in there." Laura grabbed his arm. "Jackson, it's too dangerous. The whole place could collapse." But Jackson was already moving toward the entrance, with Thor right beside him. The German shepherd's military training kicked in as he took point, leading them through the least dangerous path into the burning structure. Inside, the smoke was thick and black, making it nearly impossible to see. The heat pressed against them like a physical wall, and the roar of the flames drowned out almost everything except the frightened sounds of trapped animals. "Start with the critical care section," Jackson shouted to Laura, who had followed him in despite the danger. "Those animals can't move on their own." They worked frantically, Thor helping to guide them through the burning barn. The dog's knowledge of the layout proved invaluable as visibility continued to decrease. Jackson's hands shook as he opened cages and carried out injured animals, his lungs burning from the smoke. Laura photographed everything even as she helped rescue the animals, documenting Garrison's attempted cover-up. "We need proof this was intentional," she called out between coughs. "The accelerant pattern, the blocked exits." A terrible cracking sound came from above as part of the roof began to give way. Thor barked a warning, and Jackson barely managed to pull Laura back before a burning beam crashed down where she had been standing. "The structure's failing," Jackson shouted. "We need to move faster." They could hear Garrison's voice from outside, giving orders to his men. "Make sure nothing gets out. We need this wrapped up clean." The smoke was getting thicker, making it harder to breathe. Jackson's eyes stung as he worked to free a cage containing 3 kittens. His fingers, slick with sweat, fumbled with the latch. Finally, it opened, and he gathered the tiny creatures against his chest. "Laura, take them," he called out, passing the kittens to her. "Get them to safety." Another section of the roof collapsed, sending sparks and burning debris raining down. The heat was becoming unbearable, and Jackson could feel his strength starting to fade. But there were still animals trapped inside, and he couldn't leave them. Thor stayed by his side, helping to locate and free the remaining animals. The dog's military training showed in every movement as he methodically worked through the barn, guiding terrified creatures toward the exits. Laura had returned after getting the kittens to safety. "Jackson, we have to go," she screamed over the roar of the flames. "The whole place is about to come down." He knew she was right. The barn's wooden structure was groaning ominously, and the smoke was so thick he could barely see his hand in front of his face. But he could still hear animals crying out in fear and pain. "Just a few more," he called back, pushing deeper into the inferno. Thor led him to where 2 dogs were huddled in a corner, too frightened to move. Jackson's lungs felt like they were on fire as he coaxed the terrified animals out. Suddenly, there was a deafening crack from above. Thor's warning bark came just in time as another massive beam gave way. Jackson dove forward, covering the 2 dogs with his body as burning debris rained down around them. "Jackson!" Laura's voice was barely audible over the roar of the flames. "Where are you?" He tried to call out, but the smoke made him choke. Thor barked again, helping Laura locate them through the thick smoke. Together, they managed to get the last 2 dogs moving toward the exit. The heat was now so intense that Jackson's skin felt like it was blistering. His vision was starting to blur, and each breath was agony. But they had almost made it. Just a few more steps. A massive explosion rocked the barn as something combustible ignited, sending a fireball rolling across the ceiling. The remaining structure began to collapse in earnest, with burning timbers falling all around them. Thor took charge, physically pushing them toward the exit. Jackson stumbled, his legs weak from smoke inhalation. Laura grabbed one of his arms, helping him stay upright as they made their final dash for safety. They burst out of the barn just as the structure gave its final groan and collapsed completely. Jackson fell to his knees in the grass, coughing violently as his lungs tried to expel the smoke. Laura was beside him, also gasping for air, her face streaked with soot. Thor stood guard over them, his fur singed, but his posture alert as he watched Garrison's men scrambling in the distance. The animals they'd rescued were scattered around them, many requiring immediate medical attention, but all of them alive. Through watering eyes, Jackson could see Garrison's furious face illuminated by the flames. The ranch baron's plan had failed. Not only were there witnesses to his attempted cover-up, but Laura's camera had captured everything. "This isn't over," Garrison snarled, but his men were already retreating to their vehicles. The sound of approaching sirens suggested someone had seen the flames and called the fire department. Jackson's chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath. His clothes were scorched and his skin burned, but a fierce sense of triumph filled him. They had saved the animals. They had survived. And most importantly, they had evidence of Garrison's crimes. Laura checked her camera, confirming the footage was safe. "We got it all," she said hoarsely. "The accelerant, the blocked exits, their attempts to trap us inside. Everything." Thor moved between them, checking them both for injuries with careful attention. His military training had served them well, helping coordinate their rescue effort and keeping them alive in the inferno. Around them, the rescued animals huddled in groups, many still frightened, but all of them safe. Jackson knew they would need immediate medical attention, but for now, he was simply grateful they had managed to save them all. The barn continued to burn behind them, its destruction marking both an end and a beginning. Garrison had tried to eliminate the evidence of his crimes, but in doing so he had only provided them with even more proof of his ruthless nature. Inside the burning barn, the situation had become dire. Thick black smoke filled every corner, and the heat was unbearable. Jackson could barely see a few feet in front of him, and the roar of the flames made it impossible to hear Laura's voice, even though she stood right beside him. "We're trapped!" Laura shouted, her voice barely audible over the crackling inferno. The exit they'd used earlier was now blocked by fallen debris, and the smoke was so dense it was impossible to find another way out. Suddenly, Thor's demeanor changed. The German shepherd's military training kicked in, and his entire bearing shifted from companion to soldier. His amber eyes focused with laser-like intensity as he assessed their situation. This wasn't just a pet trying to help. This was a highly trained military K-9 operator taking command. Jackson watched in amazement as Thor methodically scanned the burning structure. The dog's movements became precise and purposeful, exactly like the combat veteran he was. Two frightened puppies huddled in a corner caught Thor's attention. Without hesitation, he gently gathered both of them in his mouth, careful not to hurt them despite his powerful jaws. "Look at him," Laura gasped between coughs. "He's not panicking at all." Thor turned to them and barked once around the puppies in his mouth, a clear command to follow. His training was evident in every movement as he began leading them through the smoke-filled space. He moved with certainty, choosing paths that avoided weakened floorboards and staying clear of areas where the structure was about to collapse. "He knows exactly what he's doing," Jackson said, his voice filled with wonder despite their desperate situation. "This is what he was trained for, search and rescue in dangerous conditions." They followed Thor's lead as he guided them through the burning barn. When a beam crashed down just ahead of them, Thor immediately changed course, finding a safer route. His military experience showed in how he constantly assessed threats and adjusted their path accordingly. The heat was becoming unbearable, and Jackson could feel his strength fading. Laura stumbled beside him, overcome by smoke. Without releasing the puppies, Thor pressed against her legs, helping her stay upright and moving forward. The dog's training allowed him to multitask, protecting the puppies while still guiding his human charges to safety. "The smoke's too thick," Laura choked out. "I can't see anything." But Thor could. His lower position and keen senses allowed him to navigate even in these conditions. He led them carefully around obstacles they couldn't even see, his body language clearly communicating when they needed to duck or change direction. A massive crash behind them signaled another section of the roof collapsing. The temperature spike was immediate and intense. Jackson felt the heat searing his lungs with every breath. But Thor remained focused, unfazed by the chaos around them. His military training had prepared him for exactly this kind of high-stress situation. They reached what appeared to be a dead end, with flames blocking their path. Jackson's heart sank, but Thor's confident behavior never wavered. The dog led them to what looked like a solid wall and pawed at a specific spot. Jackson realized there was a small maintenance door hidden there, previously used to access equipment. "There's our way out," Jackson called to Laura. He pushed against the door, and it opened to reveal the night air beyond. Thor waited until both humans were moving toward the exit before following, still carrying the puppies securely. Just as they reached the doorway, a thunderous crack announced the barn's final collapse beginning. Thor surged forward, physically pushing Jackson and Laura through the opening with his powerful body. They tumbled onto the grass outside, just as the structure gave way completely. Safe in the cool night air, Jackson watched in amazement as Thor gently set down the two puppies he'd carried through the entire ordeal. The German Shepherd immediately began checking them for injuries, his movements precise and practiced, clearly part of his military medical training. "I've never seen anything like it," Laura said, still catching her breath. "The way he took control in there, it was incredible." Jackson nodded, understanding now why his brother-in-law had trusted this dog with his life in combat. Thor's actions hadn't just been brave. They'd been strategic, calculated, and professional. This was the training and courage that had made him a military hero, now used to save civilian lives. The puppies Thor had rescued whimpered softly, and the German Shepherd turned his attention back to them. His gentleness with the small animals was striking, especially considering the power and authority he'd just displayed. He positioned himself protectively near them, his military bearing still evident even in this calmer moment. "He never gave up his true training," Jackson said quietly, watching Thor comfort the frightened puppies. "Garrison tried to turn him into a hunting dog, but his real nature, his desire to save lives, was too strong to corrupt." Laura pulled out her camera, which had somehow survived the inferno, and began documenting Thor's interaction with the rescued puppies. "People need to see this," she said. "They need to understand what Garrison tried to destroy. Not just a dog, but a hero." Thor looked up at them, his intelligent eyes reflecting the flames of the burning barn behind them. In that moment, Jackson saw not just a dog, but a soldier still serving, still protecting, still living up to the highest ideals of his training. The bond between them had deepened through this crisis, forged in fire, and built on a shared commitment to saving lives. The German Shepherd stood alert, scanning their surroundings for any new threats, while still maintaining protective contact with the puppies he'd rescued. Even now, he wasn't fully relaxing. His military training kept him vigilant, ready to respond to any new danger that might threaten his charges. The flames from the burning barn lit up the night sky, casting an eerie orange glow across the surrounding field. Jackson, Laura, and Thor had barely caught their breath when the sound of tires crunching on gravel announced an approaching vehicle. Thor's ears perked up, and his body tensed as headlights swept across them. Wade Garrison's truck skidded to a stop, and he leapt out, his face contorted with rage. In his right hand, he gripped a hunting rifle. The weapon's metal surface reflected the dancing flames as he raised it to his shoulder. "You've ruined everything," Garrison shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "That development deal was worth millions, and you and that traitor dog destroyed it all." Laura quietly slipped her hand into her camera bag, pulling out her phone to record. Jackson stepped forward, trying to keep Garrison's attention focused on him rather than Thor or the evidence of his crimes scattered around them. "It's over, Garrison," Jackson said firmly. "We know everything. The poisonings, the illegal land grabs, all of it." Garrison's laugh was harsh and unhinged. "You think anyone will believe a broke vet and some tree-hugging photographer? I own this town." He swung the rifle toward Thor, who stood protectively in front of the rescued puppies. "Once I eliminate that military mutt, there won't be any evidence left." "Thor was never your dog. Jackson declared, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "You stole him after my brother-in-law died in Afghanistan. He was a hero who saved American soldiers, not some hunting dog you could corrupt." "That dog was wasted on the military," Garrison snarled. "I tried to make him into something useful, but he kept fighting the training. Wouldn't hunt, wouldn't kill, just kept saving worthless strays instead." Laura's phone captured every word as Garrison continued his angry confession. Those animals were in the way of progress. Every stray, every farm dog, every pet that might alert people to what was happening on their land. They all had to go. The antifreeze was clean, quick. No one was supposed to connect the deaths. Thor's posture changed subtly. His military training seemed to activate as he recognized the threat. His muscles coiled, ready to spring, but he waited with the patience of a trained combat veteran. "But your precious military mutt kept interfering," Garrison ranted, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Stealing my supplies, rescuing animals I'd poisoned, bringing them to you. Should have put him down the moment he started showing his true colors." The rifle's barrel steadied on Thor. Time to finish this. What happened next unfolded with military precision. As Garrison's finger squeezed the trigger, Thor launched into action. The German Shepherd moved with incredible speed, using the exact techniques he'd learned in combat. He struck low and fast, hitting Garrison's arm at precisely the right point to disarm him without causing serious injury. The rifle went flying, landing harmlessly in the grass. Before Garrison could react, Thor had him pinned, using his weight and training to immobilize the man without causing harm. It was a textbook military K9 takedown, designed to subdue without maiming. "Get off me, you stupid animal!" Garrison thrashed, but Thor held him firmly, showing the same discipline that had made him invaluable in combat situations. Laura circled the scene, her phone capturing every detail. "Got it all," she announced. "The confession, the attempted shooting, everything." Jackson knelt beside the pinned rancher. "Thor's not just some dog you could twist to your purposes, Garrison. He's a decorated military veteran who spent his whole life protecting others. You couldn't change that, no matter how hard you tried." Garrison's struggles weakened as the fight drained out of him. "You don't understand," he gasped. "That development deal would have made this whole town rich. A few dead animals don't matter in the big picture." "They mattered to the children who lost their pets," Jackson said quietly. "They mattered to the families whose land you stole. They mattered to Thor, who never forgot his true purpose, to protect and serve." Blue and red lights began flashing in the distance as police cars approached, summoned by Laura's earlier call. Thor maintained his hold on Garrison, his training evident in every controlled movement. He wasn't acting out of anger or revenge. This was the calculated response of a professional military K9 doing his duty. "The video evidence is already backed up to the cloud," Laura announced, still recording. "Every word of your confession, your attempt to shoot Thor, all of it. There's no buying your way out of this one." Garrison's face crumpled as he finally realized the full extent of his defeat. The development scheme, the animal poisonings, the illegal land grabs, everything was about to be exposed. And it had all been brought down by the very dog whose training he had tried to corrupt. Thor held his position until the police arrived, then released Garrison only when commanded by the officers. The German Shepherd immediately returned to guarding the rescued puppies, his transition from combat mode to protector seamless and natural. As the police led Garrison away in handcuffs, Jackson watched Thor attending to the scared puppies. The dog's gentle demeanor now showed no sign of the fierce military precision he displayed moments ago. This was Thor's true nature, a guardian who used his combat skills not for violence, but to protect the innocent. Laura reviewed the footage on her phone, her eyes wide. "It's all here," she said. Every confession, every threat, and the way Thor took him down, it was incredible, like watching a trained soldier in action. Jackson nodded, understanding now more than ever why his brother-in-law had trusted this dog with his life. Thor had proven himself a hero once again, using his military training not for destruction, but to prevent violence and save lives. The German shepherd looked up at them, his intelligent eyes reflecting the last flames of the dying barn fire. In that moment, he was both warrior and guardian, his true nature finally free to shine through the years of Garrison's attempted corruption. The morning after Garrison's arrest dawned clear and crisp over the Montana landscape. Jackson sat in his clinic's office, staring at the pile of bills that still covered his desk, when his phone buzzed with an unexpected call. The caller ID displayed Federal Bureau of Investigation. His heart raced as he answered. Dr. Winston speaking. Doctor. Winston, this is Special Agent Sarah Martinez. We're investigating Wade Garrison's activities following the incident with the military K-9 unit member designated as Thor. Could you come down to the field office in Helena this afternoon? 2 hours later, Jackson found himself in a federal building conference room surrounded by investigators from multiple agencies. Thor lay at his feet, officially recognized now as a retired military working dog. Special Agent Martinez spread photographs across the table. Mr. Garrison's development scheme went far beyond local animal cruelty. We've uncovered systematic fraud targeting veteran land acquisition programs. She pointed to documentation showing how Garrison had manipulated property records. He specifically targeted land owned by military families, using shell companies to hide his identity. He exploited programs meant to help veterans keep their family farms. Jackson leaned forward, his throat tight. How many families? Dozens, another agent replied. He'd create financial pressure through various means, then swoop in with lowball offers when people got desperate. The poison campaign against local animals was part of his strategy to devalue properties and drive people away. The investigation moved quickly. Federal prosecutors filed multiple charges against Garrison, fraud against veteran assistance programs, systematic animal cruelty, attempted assault with a deadly weapon, and conspiracy to commit land fraud. The evidence was overwhelming, bolstered by Laura's video footage and financial records seized from Garrison's offices. Within days, federal authorities froze all of Garrison's assets and began the process of seizing his illegally obtained properties. The man who had wielded so much power over their small town watched his empire crumble from behind bars, denied bail due to the severity of the charges and flight risk. News of the federal investigation spread through the community like wildfire. Local TV stations ran special reports detailing how Garrison had preyed upon military families and veterans. The story of Thor, the military K-9 hero who had fought against Garrison's corruption and saved countless animals, captured hearts across the region. One morning, Jackson arrived at his clinic to find the parking lot full. A crowd of townspeople had gathered, led by Mayor Sarah Chen and several local business owners. Dr. Winston, the mayor called out, we've been talking about what you and Thor did for this community, about how you stood up to Garrison when no one else would, even though it could have cost you everything. She gestured to the crowd. These people all have stories. Lost pets they now know were poisoned. Land they were pressured to sell. They want to help. Laura stepped forward, holding a large check. We organized fundraisers across 3 counties. Local businesses matched donations. Even people from neighboring towns contributed when they heard the story. Jackson's vision blurred as he saw the amount written on the check, enough to cover his late wife's medical bills and keep the clinic operating for months. We can't let our only veterinarian go under, a local rancher called out. Not when you risked everything to protect our animals and expose the truth. More support poured in over the following weeks. Farmers brought supplies for the clinic. local contractors volunteered to repair the building's aging roof. A tech company donated new computers and medical monitoring equipment. The community that Garrison had tried to bully into submission came together to ensure its protectors would survive. Thor became a local celebrity, with children stopping by the clinic just to see the heroic German Shepherd. Jackson often found himself watching as Thor gently accepted their attention, showing no trace of the military precision he'd displayed during Garrison's takedown. The dog had found his true purpose, not as a weapon or hunting dog, but as a protector of the vulnerable. Federal investigators continued to uncover the extent of Garrison's crimes. The evidence showed he had been building his illegal empire for years, using threats and manipulation to force people off their land. The development project that would have destroyed the town's character was revealed to be built entirely on fraud and stolen properties. One afternoon, Special Agent Martinez visited the clinic with news. "The federal seizure of Garrison's holdings is complete," she announced. "Given the nature of his crimes against veterans, the judge has ordered that all proceeds from asset sales will go to a victim restitution fund." She smiled at Jackson. "Several of the properties will be returned to their original owners, military families who can prove they were forced to sell under duress. The rest will be sold at fair market value, with proceeds supporting veteran services in the community." Jackson watched Thor playing with a recovering kitten in the clinic's recovery room. What about Thor? Will the military want him back? "Thor's officially retired from service," Martinez assured him. "Given his age and your family connection through your brother-in-law, you've been approved as his permanent guardian. Besides," she added with a grin, "I think he's found his new mission here." The transformation of the town was remarkable. Where Garrison had created an atmosphere of fear and isolation, new connections formed between neighbors. People brought their animals to Jackson's clinic without worry about cost, often paying what they could and promising to help others in turn. Laura's photographs of Thor's rescue work and the evidence of Garrison's crimes became part of a traveling exhibition about animal welfare and community resilience. The story spread beyond their small town, inspiring other communities to watch for similar schemes targeting vulnerable landowners. As Jackson reviewed his clinic's newly organized books one evening, Thor resting contentedly nearby, he reflected on how quickly justice had arrived once the truth came to light. Garrison's power had seemed unshakable, but it had crumbled in the face of federal investigation and community unity. The pile of unpaid bills on his desk had been replaced by thank-you cards from local families. Where financial pressure had once threatened to close the clinic's doors, community support now ensured its survival. The town had reclaimed its soul from Garrison's greed, emerging stronger and more connected than before. Thor lifted his head and gave a soft woof of contentment, as if sensing Jackson's thoughts. The German Shepherd's military training had served its highest purpose, not in combat, but in protecting the innocent and bringing a corrupt man to justice. Together, they had helped restore not just the law, but the heart of their community. The morning after Garrison's arrest dawned clear and crisp over the Montana landscape. Jackson sat in his office, sifting through a stack of papers. But these weren't bills anymore. They were adoption forms for Thor. The German Shepherd lay at his feet, chin resting on his massive paws, those intelligent amber eyes watching Jackson's every move. Every few minutes, Thor's tail would thump against the floor, as if he knew exactly what these papers meant. "You know what this means, buddy." Jackson reached down to scratch behind Thor's ears. "You're officially staying with me. We're keeping your military name and honors, of course. It's what David would have wanted." At the mention of his former handler's name, Thor's ears perked up. Jackson felt tears welling in his eyes as he thought of his brother-in-law. "Yeah, I miss him too, but I promise to take care of you just like he did." A gentle knock on the doorframe made them both look up. Laura stood there, camera hanging from her neck as always. But now her presence brought warmth instead of just professional alliance. "How are our heroes doing this morning?" she asked, stepping into the office. Thor immediately got up to greet her, receiving a loving pat on his head. "Just making it official," Jackson replied, holding up the adoption papers. "Thor Winston has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Laura pulled up a chair beside his desk, her hand finding his. "It's perfect. David would be proud of both of you." A small meow interrupted their moment. The rescued kitten, now named Hope by the clinic staff, sauntered into the office like she owned the place. Her recovery had been remarkable, and she'd become something of a local celebrity. Children visiting the clinic would always ask to see the brave kitten that Thor saved. Hope jumped onto Jackson's desk, purring loudly as she settled herself right on top of his paperwork. Thor watched with what could only be described as pride, his tail wagging steadily. "She's certainly made herself at home," Laura laughed, scratching under Hope's chin. "The perfect clinic mascot." Jackson looked around his office, taking in the changes of the past few weeks. Where bills and foreclosure notices had once cluttered his desk, there were now thank you cards from local families whose pets Thor had saved. The community's response had been overwhelming. Fundraisers, donations, and an outpouring of support that had helped clear his medical debts. "I still can't believe how everything's turned around," he said softly. "A month ago, I was ready to close the clinic's doors for good." Laura squeezed his hand. "Sometimes the worst moments lead us to exactly where we need to be." She hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Speaking of which, I've made a decision. I'm staying in town permanently." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. "What about your wildlife photography assignments?" "I've talked to my editor. We're going to do a series on animal rescue operations in rural communities, starting with this one." She smiled, her eyes meeting his. "Besides, I found something here worth staying for." The warmth in her voice made Jackson's chest tight with emotion. After losing his wife, he'd never thought he'd find love again. But here was Laura, who shared his passion for helping animals, who'd fought beside him when everything seemed hopeless. "We could use a good photographer for the rescue operation," he said, trying to keep his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Thor can't do all the PR work himself." As if on cue, Thor let out a soft woof, making them both laugh. The German Shepherd had already gained quite a following on social media, thanks to Laura's photos of his rescue work. People loved the story of the military hero turned animal savior. Jackson stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the clinic's newly expanded yard. Construction workers were putting the finishing touches on the rescue facility. New kennels, a rehabilitation area, and a training space where Thor could work with other dogs. "It's amazing how many people want to help," he mused. "We've got volunteers lined up, donations coming in, and more calls every day about animals needing rescue." Laura joined him at the window, her shoulder brushing against his. "That's because people recognize true heroes when they see them. Both of you gave this community something to believe in." Thor padded over to stand between them, his solid presence a reminder of everything that had brought them to this moment. Hope leaped down from the desk to weave between their legs, completing their unlikely family picture. Jackson turned to Laura, finding the courage to say what he'd been feeling for weeks. "Stay with us, not just for the rescue operation, but with me, with us." Laura's answer came in the form of a kiss, soft and full of promise. When they parted, she was smiling through tears. "I thought you'd never ask." Thor's tail thumped against the floor in approval, and Hope purred louder. Outside, the Montana sun painted the mountains in shades of gold, a new day dawning for all of them. Where there had once been grief and loneliness, Jackson now found purpose, love, and family. All because a brave German shepherd had appeared at his door one night with a dying kitten's in his mouth. Jackson signed the last adoption paper with a steady hand, making it official. Thor Winston would continue his mission of saving lives, but now with a proper team behind him. Together, they would honor David's memory by building something meaningful, a place where hope, healing, and second chances weren't just possibilities, but promises. Thank you for watching. If even one moment stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow with another story that speaks to the heart.